Ladies and gentlemen, it's the moment you've been waiting for. In this corner, coming in at 5 feet tall, the ferocious, the deadly, the man, the myth, the legend, Wile E Coyote. And his opponent this evening, towering over his competition, it's the sturdy, the unbreakable, the impenetrable Wall. Alright gentlemen, I want a good clean fight tonight. The match will start in
3, 2, 1, go!
Well, that was kind of anticlimactic. Hey, what's up, beautiful people? My name's Caleb. I hope you're having an amazing day today, and I have a question for you. Does anyone else remember Looney Tunes? As a kid, I remember watching the show on the Boomerang channel all the time. But even as a kid, one question always stuck in the back of my brain. Every time I watched the Roadrunner and Coyote cartoons, the thought always came to me, how the heck is this coyote still alive? What? What the? I mean, seriously. I've seen this dude be squished, splatted, exploded, yet every single Saturday morning when I turned on the show, there he was again? And I know what you're gonna say. You're gonna say, Caleb, it's a cartoon, duh. You can't expect it to be realistic. But guys, get this. There's a way for us to scientifically prove what Wile E's body would be feeling in these shenanigans. So go ahead, strap in, grab a snack, because this is gonna be a wild ride. But first, how about a history lesson real quick? If you somehow don't know who Wile E Coyote is, which I mean, you probably didn't have a childhood, but anyway, if you don't know who Wile E Coyote is, let me catch you up to speed. Dating all the way back to 1949, he made his first debut in the film Fast and Furious. In this film, we see for the very first time, Wile E Coyote attempting to hunt his prey Beep Beep the Roadrunner. This is the same story across all the 70 years, so if you missed one of them, don't feel like you missed out. You're really not missing too much. The coyote always devises a scheme trying to catch the Roadrunner, and it always blows up in his face in a hilarious way. And when I was researching for this video, one of them really stood out for me. Like, look at this. This is what I'm talking about. Wile E, if you can't simply pull a string correctly to launch a catapult, why on earth, dude, do you think that you can balance upside down on your head while ziplining to the ground? You're not the sharpest tool in the shed, are you, big guy? Now, even though Wile E's brain is as smooth as a baby's butt, say what you want about him, he does have that grit, my friends. Day after day, year after year, decade after decade, he has been hunting this Roadrunner, and each failure, although funny, is definitely painful. And as I was watching him, it really got me thinking, what would actually happen to Wile E if these failures were in real life? What would happen if we took real-world physics and placed it into the imaginary world of Looney Tunes? And that, my friends, is how this project began. For this video, there's one scene in particular that I want to analyze. It's from the movie Coyote Falls. Let's go ahead and take a look. So 3 big things happen here that I want to point out. First, we have Wile E holding onto the truck as the bungee begins to pull him harder and harder until the truck finally gives and gets slingshotted backwards. The second thing I want to look at is Wile E's impact with the bridge he makes when he gets slingshotted. And then thirdly, because homeboy just can't catch a break, the gas tank explodes, and we're going to analyze that as well. So we have 3 main topics. We're going to look at the force in his hands from holding onto the truck. We're going to look at the impulse he feels from RKO'd by a bridge. Then finally, we're going to look at the third one, the pressure he would feel from the explosion. So firstly, let's find the force in Wile E's hands. If you remember from high school physics, Isaac Newton, you know the dude that saw an apple fall from the tree and was like, let me write all the physics, stated that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. What this tells us is that the same tension that's in the bungee is actually the same tension that's in Wile E's hands. So if we find out how much tension is in the rope, that will tell us how much force is in Wile E's hands. For this scene, we want to analyze one moment in particular, when the truck is completely stopped before it gets slingshotted backwards. This is because this point will have the most tug, aka force, in the rope. But that begs the question, how do we find the tension in the bungee? And in order to do that, we need to actually flip the way we're thinking about this and switch to energy. Energy comes in two main flavors, kinetic and potential. Kinetic energy is the energy that's in motion, while potential is the stockpiled energy that gives you the potential to do something. So if we're looking at what's happening to the Coyote right here, the bungee cord is converting the kinetic energy of the truck into potential energy stored in the rope. Basically, what this allows us to do is set up an equation between the kinetic energy of the truck and the potential energy of the bungee cord. The kinetic energy of an object is equal to 1/2 mass times the velocity squared, and the potential energy of the bungee is going to be equal to 1/2 k times the stretch distance. If you're wondering what K is, all that is, it's called a spring constant. What that tells us is how stiff a spring is. Think about it like this. If you have a rubber band that's really easy to stretch out, it has a really low spring constant. But if it's really hard to stretch out, then you have a really high spring constant. And today, for our experiments, we're going to say that Wile E has a really high spring constant, because if you just look at this cartoon, the bungee cord's insane. It definitely has a high spring constant. We're going to estimate that it's around 200 newtons per meter, which is high, yet it's a Wile E Coyote cartoon, so fight me. From looking at the truck Wile E's holding onto, the closest thing I can match it to was a Mercedes-Benz Axior tanker truck. And that's what we're going to be using to get the masses of our truck, trailer, and tank. And we have to remember that this gas tank isn't empty because of that big explosion we see at the end. So we need to find out the weight of that gas too. If we go ahead and assume that the tank is filled up to the full capacity of 26,000 liters by taking a quick trip to the DMV, knowing the density of gasoline, we can find out that the actual mass of the gasoline's around 20,000 kilograms. But here's what we're really after here. We want to find out how far the bungee is stretched. This is because if we find out how far the bungee is stretched, we can use that distance to find out the force that bungee's exerting, aka the force that Wile E feels in his hands. Now it looks like we have everything we need except one thing. We need to find out how fast the truck is moving before it's slowed down. And I hate to be Captain Obvious, but I don't see any rulers or measuring tapes or anything. So we are in a freaking desert after all, so we're gonna get a little bit creative. If you rewind back to an earlier part of the movie, there's actually something pretty useful we can look at. Wile E jumps down aiming for the Roadrunner, then gets splotched right on top of the truck. Now since Wile E's fully spread out here, we can actually use him as our ruler. I was able to deduce that the truck is traveling about 6 Wile E Coyote heights in 10 frames. If we use Wile E Coyote's wiki height of 5 feet tall, this film is running at 24 frames per second. We can calculate the truck is traveling at 21.95 meters per second, or right about 50 miles per hour, which I gotta be honest, is probably the most realistic thing that we've seen so far in this show. So cool, we have our initial velocity, and that means we can throw it into our energy equation to find out how far the bungee cord stretches. Plugging in all our numbers, we find out that the bungee cord stretches 306 meters. Then finally we can find out the big question. How much force is in Wile E Coyote's hands? And we get a shocking result of 61,200 newtons. Now, if you're American scum like me, this means absolutely nothing to you. So let me put it to you like this. Wile E Coyote, just by holding this truck, is experiencing over 13,000 pounds of force in his hands. His wrist, humerus, and radius would all be shattered, and his shoulder and hips pulled right out of their sockets and dislocated. Jeez, Wile E, I know you want to eat that Roadrunner, but maybe you should just go to Denny's or something, dude. It's not looking too good for you. But this raises a pretty good question. Would this amount of force tear off Wile E's arms and legs? Now, because the internet's a dark and horrible place, there is some data that we can use to find out how much force is required to pull off a limb. So good news, I think I found the numbers we need, but bad news, I'm probably on a government watch list for the rest of my life. Anyways, the average force required that I was seeing was around 30,000 kilonewtons. This is well below our 61,000 calculation. So that would mean best case scenario, and Wile E, I really do mean best case for you, man. You're walking away with shattering bones in your fingers, hands, wrists, and on top of that, dislocations and muscle tears all up the shoulders. Worst case scenario, and honestly the much more likely outcome, Wile E comes out as a quadruple amputee. Yeah. And you thought this was a kid show. Oh no, it's gruesome, my friends. Wile E Coyote would be dead. There's no way he could survive this at all. And if you're not convinced, don't worry, we still have 2 more scenes to look into. All right, our next scene on the chopping block is where Wile E gets slingshot from the bridge while giving the gas tank a big old bear hug. What we're gonna do here is switch up how we're thinking about this one, and we're gonna move into impulse and momentum. If you aren't a cringe engineering student like myself, this stuff may sound like a foreign language to you, but just stick with it for a little bit because it's actually pretty cool. We know that force is like a push or a pull, right? So all that an impulse is a push or a pull for a duration of time. Let me give you an example so it makes sense. Let's say you want to lift up one handsome piece of man candy, Chris Evans.
Wow.
Well, that's 180 pounds that you need to lift up. But let's say you want to lift up Chris Evans for 5 seconds. Well, that's 180 times 5, and that would be 900 pound seconds. Impulse allows us to combine both force and time, and that will be really useful for this problem. Because if we want to find out the impulse of Wile E, we get to use momentum. And all momentum is, it's not super confusing, it's just mass in motion. And impulse is equal to the change in momentum. So let's go back to the scene at hand. Wile E's starting from rest here, since, you know, he isn't moving, you silly little goofball. And then he gets slingshotted right into the bridge. And if we can figure out how fast Wile E is moving right before he hits the bridge, we'll be able to find out the total impulse that he's feeling. And to do that, we need to use some kinematics.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Now, if you remember earlier, we found the distance that the bungee is stretched, but that still doesn't tell us the total distance that Wile E is away from the bridge. This is because he was still traveling at that original 50 miles per hour before getting slowed down by the bungee cord. I found that he's traveling at this speed for 31 frames, so we can add the initial distance to the 306 meters that the bungee was stretched earlier, and what this will give us is the total distance away Wile E is from the bridge. Now it's time to go back to kinematics. Using this lovely distance equation, we have everything we need to solve for acceleration. So by plugging and chugging, we get an acceleration of 576 meters per second squared. Oh my gosh! In this moment, Wile E is experiencing 58.8 G-forces of acceleration, a whopping 6 times the amount that trained fighter pilots can handle. Good grief, Wile E. It's not worth it, my guy. You are gonna die. You know, the amputations didn't already get you. But we're not even done yet, guys. We haven't even calculated the impulse. So here we go. Using the acceleration that we just found, we can go ahead and plug it into our other kinematics equation. And from there, we can get how fast Wile E's traveling right before hitting the bridge. And from there, we can get what we're really after and find out the impulse Wile E is feeling for a grand total of 22,641,000 Newton seconds. And oh my gosh, that number is insane, you guys. That number is so insane, I don't even know how to describe it to you. But let me try. The speed required for a 2010 Honda Civic to get that kind of impulse from hitting a brick wall, which would mean it completely stops, would be over 38,000 miles per hour. That's 50 times the speed of sound, you guys. Like I said, this show is wacky. Wile E would be dead before he even hit the wall by feeling a G-force of over 58. All of his gooey inwards would be sloshed right towards his feet, tearing valves, tissues, arteries, and everything that was in its way. All the blood in his head would be rushed right out of his brain and go down to his feet, while he would lose consciousness instantly from being launched. This isn't a kid's show, guys. Then again, I don't think Warner Bros. Would sell all that merch if the character had realistic consequences, so hey, they're doing something right. And now finally, guys, we're on to our last segment. We're gonna look at the pressure from the explosion. So we already know Wile E would be dead, right? I don't think there's any debate there. But if there's a little bit of ambiguity that he could survive without his arms and legs, and maybe when he hits the bridge, you know, maybe it hit him in the knee and he's fine. But he's out of the woods now. There's nothing else for us to worry about, right? He just gets to go home. Oh yeah, we have to calculate that. First thing we need to do is figure out how much gasoline made that big old boom boom over there. But we actually did this earlier when we were solving our first problem. If you were sleeping or you have the attention span of a goldfish, like yours truly, let me remind you how we figured this out. Every material, including gasoline, has a certain density, and what this tells us is how much of that substance there is in a given space. And since we know the substance that's exploding is gasoline, we know the density of gasoline is 0.1429 kilograms per liter. So if we assume that the tank on the trunk is completely full, like we did earlier, we're working with 26,000 liters of gasoline, or right about 19,300 kilograms of gasoline. By looking up the energy content in gasoline, we're able to find out how many megajoules of energy is inside our total amount of gasoline. And our total amount of energy released is 896,234 megajoules, or a little over 200,000 kilograms of TNT. Yeah, 200,000. This is gonna be good, guys. But we don't care about how much energy is in the explosion. I mean, yeah, 200,000 kilograms of TNT is pretty cool and pretty wacky and pretty crazy and but that's not really what you clicked on this video for. You want to see how bad the coyote gets messed up. Well, your wait's over because I did the work for you. Let's get to it. Now, I'm definitely not a bomb expert, but you know who is? Google. So by adding more reasons for the government to watch me on a watch list, I found the exact formula that we need for this. I'll be honest, I don't know how this works, but I just plugged and chugged. So P represents the pressure that you feel from the blast, E is the energy released from the blast, and R is the distance away you are from the blast. For the distance away that Wile E is from the blast, since he is literally sandwiched in between the tank and the bridge when it goes off, we're gonna take the thickness of the tank to be his distance away. Since everything we've calculated so far has been extremely realistic, let's go ahead and assume that this truck is following American law for a tanker truck holding explosive liquids and has a minimum thickness of 3/16 of an inch. From here, we can plug everything in and get our final and most insane answer yet. So drum roll, please. Wile E Coyote is going to fill 8,296,916,528,000 megapascals. That number is huge, I'm telling you, huge. Now this number is completely unfathomable for you and me. We have no idea what 8.3 exapascals even looks like. And by the way, exa means that there's 18 zeros following that number. Absolutely insane. This is just absolutely insane. Come on, I expect this kind of carnage in Mortal Kombat or GTA 5, not freaking Looney Tunes. This is the kind of pressure over 81 million times the pressure at the bottom of the ocean. You know diamonds? Those things that are made under immense pressure, deep in the ground? Well, diamonds start forming at 750,000 psi. Our pressure is 1.5 billion, yes, billion with a B, times that. Our coyote would be absolutely vaporized. Never mind first-degree burns or broken arms, there would be nothing left of him at all. Oh my gosh. Next time you release one of these cartoons, Warner Bros., don't slap a G rating on it. This should be rated R. To wrap it all up, Wile E Coyote, our lovable character in question, would be dead. Needless to say though, there are some things that could have been done completely differently. And if you're watching this and you're a creative person, feel free if you're up to the task to try these different approaches. For our first problem, if we included friction, we could have had a much more realistic number than what we actually got. My issue with this was trying to connect the stretch distance of the rope to the distance traveled by the truck. But hey, if anyone can figure it out, leave a comment below. Secondly, for our collision into the bridge, separating force and time from impulse would have given us a better idea of what Wile E's actually experiencing. I mean, to be clear, we know he would be dead, but maybe his organs would actually be ripped out of his body. Maybe they would shred themselves up from the force placed upon them. These are the kinds of questions that could only be answered if we had access to force. Finally, last but not least, for the explosion problem, this one left me a little bit stumped. I considered using ideal gas law at first, but it didn't really feel right because the gas wasn't contained at all, so I ended up going with Google to give me a formula to use. That's where I got my approximation for the pressure Wile E would feel, but I'm sure some of you blast engineers out there would be able to actually find a much better way to find out the pressure Wile E's feeling. And since these are the three methods I used, let's go ahead and bring out the big totals of everything Wile E experienced. From holding onto the truck, Wile E's massive forearms are resisting 61.2 thousand newtons of force, which he is definitely feeling in both his arms and his legs. We showed that this was well above the threshold to pull off a limb, so before even checking the collision and the explosion that he has later, Wile E is losing both his arms and his legs. Next is when he smacks straight into the bridge, the impulse we calculated for this moment would be 22.6 million newton seconds. But don't worry, he hasn't even reached the bridge yet. He's getting launched with 58 G-forces, more than 6 times the amount of G-forces fighter pilots are able to withstand. Finally, if you aren't convinced that Wile E would be knocking on heaven's door, we see him in the explosion. A blast equivalent to a whopping 200,000 kilograms of TNT blasting off with him less than 5 millimeters away, causing him to feel over 8 exapascals of pressure. This is just ridiculous at this point, and this would completely vaporize him, leaving nothing left. So in short, Wile E Coyote is so undeniably dead from all of this. And with that being said, there's really nothing else to say other than, that's all, folks.